continuing. So this idea of electronization is the idea to impounding technology in the process. And remember, the moment that you put, let's say, a computer to do a function, the function, instead of taking minutes or hours, takes seconds or microseconds. So anything that can be electronized needs to be electronized to decrease latency of the process, to decrease delay of the process. And most things are going to be reasonably automatic in the future. And you say, well, is there going to be any jobs left for human beings? Let someone else worry about that. I think there'll be jobs. At least there was a big revolution that changed society from agricultural to industrial, and about 50% of the people became 5% of the people in the US. Then there was the Industrial Revolution. After the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing went away from the United States. Still there are jobs, etc. So there'll be some adaptation. I don't know what's going to happen. But we are going to talk about these issues that are very interesting. So in the electronization, we are going to talk about changing things into an automated way. Then we're going to come back to what we talked today. Earlier is we are going to try to look at you using terminals, you using cell phones. I see everyone now and then kind of picking up the cell phone, putting it the old below the desk trick. The thing is that you can't read your cell phone without looking down. Okay? I suggest if you're going to do that, put some very dark glasses. Okay? Because if you don't put the dark glasses, I see that you're using your cell phone. No, her. No, her. And it's just, dark glasses is good. But I want to tell you something to start you on this discussion. Okay, which I don't know this. This is just guess. My friend Sandy Burton, he was a very interesting guy. He was with me at Columbia. And Sandy Burton said that there are facts and there are factoids. A fact is something you know for sure. A factoid is something that you don't know for sure, but you say it with a lot of emphasis. And Sandy Burton was a very famous guy. He was chief accountant of the SEC. He was a partner at E&Y before chief accountant at SEC, then was dean of Columbia Business School for 2 terms. Okay? And he was great. He had fantastic ideas. And even when he was dean, he said, the students have the right to listen to me. And he was kind of a big guy, real big. And so he would teach while being a dean, which is very unusual. And he got the Idi Amin Award. Do you know who Idi Amin was? A very murderous African president, from the students, and they loved him. But he walked into class, he closed the 2 doors, and no one could walk in, no one could walk out. And this big guy, one day a student, walks out, and he starts trotting, opens the door, and grabs the guy and pulls the guy back. Okay, so they gave him a great Emmy. But he was got very good teacher. He was a great guy. But he used to say about facts and factoid. This is a factoid. And this is your brain. Okay, this whole idea that you only use 10% of your brain and you have unlimited memory capacity is wrong. Okay, you don't have limited memory capacity and you use a good part of your brain. Your brain is very busy moving your legs, moving your eyes, controlling that you continue breathing, etc., just to begin. Okay, and besides that, and that's just one part of your brain. The other parts of the brain doing all kinds of other things. Now, the other thing is people say neurons don't grow. Neurons do grow. Okay, you resurrect your neurons and they get replenished. This is already known. You know, there's actually, this is bad literature to quote, but you like it. Is National Geographic has an article maybe 3 months ago about the brain, and it's very, very interesting. Actually, maybe I'll put it in your readings. You can have a look at it. It's fantastic. It's in colors and show a lot of the research. Next thing, the brain has, just like a computer has operating systems. And these parts of the brain basically control the rest of the brain. And then the next thing is that people really didn't realize. The brain is tremendously pliable. It's very adaptive. You have a stroke, which destroys a part of your brain. The brain reorganizes its functions around the stroke. For you to continue immobilized and etc. is because it couldn't fix it. It's tremendously, tremendously pliable. If you are spending neuron cycles to read your cell phone, or multiple attention spans on TV, radio, and etc., if it does that, it's not going to do something else. It kind of pushes back and forth. There is a very interesting thing, I'll talk more about it later. 500 years ago, no, let's say 1,000 years ago, how did history was maintained? One thing was written history, but some cultures didn't have writing. Oral history. So there were these people that, today in Africa, they are the griots. My daughter has a film about a griot. Okay, Youssou N'Dour, very famous singer in Senegal, is actually a family of griots. And what these guys were, they were singers that remembered oral history. So a large part of their brains is occupied about remembering facts that they tell generation to generation in forms of songs or in forms of poetry. Now, then some cultures started developing written language. It's better than remembering it. It's less ephemeral, doesn't disappear so fast. But the cognitive effort to interpret characters is complex because you need to recognize the character, you need to associate a character to the other, you need to put a sentence together, and you need to understand the context around it. It's even more complex when you're not reading, but you are listening and trying to write it down, because you have to pick up a sound, link it to a character set, and connect the character set to other character sets. You do reading and writing without even thinking about it, but it's very, very brain occupying. Until like 1400, maybe a little bit earlier than that, 1200, people who read and wrote were the scribes. They were specialists, like accountants. They were scribes. And what does a scribe does? Writes things down. And they also read it. And so what they actually did is wrote things without intervals. It's called in Latin scripta continua. So there was no intervals between words, but those guys knew how to do it. And if you try to speak the way you read word after word, you're going to see that you speak like a robot. Ba, 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 ba. And you also don't divide your syllables that way, and et cetera, et cetera. So they attribute to St. Augustine, people started picking up these things and taking to their cells, I mean, they were monks, to read. And so that's called silent writing, reading, scripta silenti. And what does that mean is that you are reading. Now that made the scripta continua very difficult. And so they started putting spaces between the things. This was a 100 years process. The other thing is you heard about Gutenberg. Gutenberg, you said, well, he printed the first Bible. Okay, but what actually Gutenberg did was an industrialist, really. And what he did is in the next 50 years, Gutenberg's method created more written knowledge than the whole history of humanity. So it was a tremendous technological evolution. But when people started getting books to read, the mix of the brain processes changed in balance. They are spending more time reading stuff and whole mechanisms to read stuff, and less time memorizing long history. And what's actually happening today is that this thing is totally being rebalanced. And that's why I asked you in the beginning, I just was seeding for later, I asked you in the beginning this question, what is a literate person, what's intelligent, what's an educated person. All these things have different meaning. And what I think is happening is that the part of the brain that will be allocated to storing facts is probably going to go down. And the part of your brain that is going to be able to do multitasking is already have expanded. There has been psychological. With psychology today, they explain some of these things, is increasing. And of course, you as accountants are going to have a little bit of a different balance on your brain with the ADS and with XBRL and the things that you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. And we are going to talk about the artifices, the things that accountants will need to do. And then we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and the singularity. Just for, have you ever heard the word singularity? Singularity is when people become less intelligent than machines, or when machines become more intelligent than people. And if you saw Space Odyssey, the Kubrick movie, basically they are in a space station, and the computer takes over the space station. And so there's kind of discussion, computers feeling, et cetera, but actually there have been some pretty serious scientists that started thinking about the singularity. And actually a couple of guys say singularity is going to be in 2050. So we'll be in your lifespan, not in mine. Now, the idea of machines taking over the world at this moment seems preposterous. I don't think the technology is nothing close to that. But the idea that many functions are going to be machine governed is pretty natural. Meaning I always ask my students, do you prefer a pilot to land your plane or a computer? And people say, oh, I prefer a person. I much prefer a computer. Response time of a computer is 1/1,000,000th of a second. Response time of a pilot is 1/10th of a second. Now, when there is anomalies, which are unexpected, usually people will do a little bit better. I'm going to tell you interesting story, not interesting, very dramatic. The Malaysian airline that's disappeared. Is it possible they don't know where it is? He says no. I have a 10th. Huh? They have tracked this thing with traditional commercial satellite system. They have several military countries with their own strategic air commands, including yours truly, American, tracking the thing. They have local radar systems that track the thing. And they don't know where it is. They have the information where it is. Do they really know it? That's questionable. You might have a lot of conspiracy theories. But big data knows where the plane is, except we have never written procedures. Planes haven't disappeared in the past. Because planes have never disappeared in the past, we don't have regular applications, apps, designed to work with big data to find these things. And what's happening now, data is expanding much faster than any application we can create. So what we do is we write things to detect the viruses or to detect something we know is going to happen. But there are many other things that we didn't anticipate. Now, this plane disappears in this very tragic situation. Now, if people think this is going to happen often enough, and the economics warrants, people are going to develop apps that will track every flying object. Not that difficult. But at this moment, the economics were not there. Now, it's quite possible that some military command knows exactly what happened with the plane, and is not telling, because, you think the Strategic Air Command wants to tell the Russians what can they track and what they can't track? So that's interesting question. But the big data is there. Big data is capturing a lot of different things. and we don't have applications working on it. And of course, what you really need is artificial intelligent devices to do more and more functionality for you. Continuing this reasoning, we are going to spend some time, and this is not directly proportional totally time we're going to spend on it. I think I'm going to drag a little bit here and here. I'm going to do less on the cloud and etc. But we are going to spend some time talking about big data. Okay, I just put together a volume for Accounting Horizons with 8 articles about big data, and this is totally about accounting and auditing big data. Now, just I want to make you think for a second. Will big data affect auditing? How?
The way we collect data, the methods.
Okay, I'm going to stay with what he just said. The reason we have big data is because in old days, we collected data manually, punched it in, and put in little database. What's happening today is that a lot of the data is being collected automatically. Okay, now I want you to pay a lot of attention, guys, a lot of attention. There is a thing called RFID, radio frequency identification. And these are chips, okay? And if you are using EasyPass, does everyone know what EasyPass is? You guys know what EasyPass is? It's a little tag that you put in your car. And when you go to the highway, it identifies that your car is there. Okay, it's basically a chip, and it gets hit by a wave, and it answers, I'm here, sends the code back. Okay, and there are the passive and the active RFIDs. Your car one is an active. It has a battery on it, which expires in about 5 years, the EasyPass tag. And when it gets a signal, it responds. And what is only sending is like a product code, like this. This is what it says. A preset product code. Now, a lot of supermarkets are labeling, tagging this, so you go to the cash register and you can tag it. But now they're putting chips. So you can go to your cash register and the thing automatically measures what you have. So if you hold large items of inventory in your warehouse, you can put an RFID chip on it, and that's what predicted is going to happen. And you never take an inventory count. You just press a button, and it kind of scans to the equipment with the chips. These are very cheap chips now that issue a radio frequency. Now, counting inventory is going to disappear if you do that. Now, much better than that. When the product comes in, you can see the product arriving. So if you made an equipment purchase or an inventory purchase, it's registered. When you sell it, the equipment goes out, or the part goes out. You also detect it. Now, you could once a year take inventory. You could take inventory once a month. You could take inventory once a day. You could make split seconds inventory taking. What's going to define how often do you do that? Yeah, that's one variable, but the main thing is the economic usage of the thing, correct? Meaning, why would you do a lot of measurements if you can't use it? So, but of course, controlling your inventory is an important thing. Is that better evidence than going and taking count of inventory once a year? Much better evidence. It gives you evidence not only on inventory, but on purchases and on sales, and extends the frame of audit evidence. Very important. GPS. Okay, you put a GPS tag on your trucks. So you know where the deliveries were made. You know if the guy stopped for a beer. You know if he has a girlfriend in the milk sales shop and he goes there to give her a kiss every day. You know where they are. And of course, that part can be tracked. Yeah.
Feel like
If technology was infallible, there would be no reason to do an IT audit. Correct? So technology is not infallible. You need to assure things. And actually, I think the auditor function is increasing, not decreasing. However, anything that you don't need to spend spit or hands to do, you can do it automatically, it's cheaper to do it that way. What's going to determine if you're going to measure it every 10th of a second or every hour is the application of that. But the fact that you can collect that evidence 1 million times a year at very little incremental cost doesn't mean that you are going to do it. You're going to do it what's necessary to be done. But big data has been created. That's the thing. You are looking skeptical. Why are you looking skeptical? But why are you looking skeptical? Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool. And again, it's like Malaysian airliner. Unless you have a reason to do it, you don't do it. Okay? And you can, the same thing about, I like the analogy of a virus detector. A virus detector is basically a file with profiles of viruses. Does it cover every virus? No, something like 98%. And half of the viruses that are in there are some nice guy that wrote them a letter and say, if I were going to write a virus, I would do this. McAfee examines that carefully and say, this could be a difficult virus, so they put a detector for that. But these are events that they can anticipate that's going to happen. There is always a Malaysian airliner can disappear without you anticipating that. Now, I'll give you another example, another painful example. The Boston bombing on the marathon. Okay? And again, it's a big data example. After that bombing happened, what did they do? They remembered, we have cameras everywhere. So they went to the cameras and they found this guy throwing something into the garbage can, and just happened that there was another garbage can. They saw the same guy doing that. So they spotted him. But this was spit and chalk effort, meaning people looking at tapes manually. Now, they didn't have a decent face recognition algorithm, and they were not set up to look at a lot of faces because they didn't think of that possibility. But the economics was such that it was worth spending thousands of people hours looking at those tapes. Next thing, they couldn't recognize who these guys were. They did something very, very dangerous. The group sourced it. They picked up those pictures and put it on the television and say, if you see this guy, let us know. The poor policeman from MIT that got shot was because of that. Because he recognized them and he by himself tried to go and apprehend them. Okay? Very dangerous stuff. Now, I don't know if the economics of that justifies creating an archive of every face in the United States and being able to recognize it with a 98% probability of accuracy. Okay, one of my axioms, technology giveth, technology taketh. Anything you get which is great in technology might also create unforeseen consequences. Main one is privacy. Privacy is gone, forget it. You don't have privacy. Your license plates are measured every time you go to a booth, okay? Your picture is taken thousands of times a day by cameras. Your credit card transactions are monitored by the credit card company, so you can use them. It goes on and on and on. Now, your big protection is the big data story I was telling you. There are too many of these things happening. They can be recorded too frequently, so the data is very big. Unless you have economic interest by someone, or religious interest, or political interest, to break your privacy, it's not going to be done. Okay, so we talked about big data. And then we're going to do a little bit about e-commerce, but actually, I'm just going to tell some things about e-commerce that we haven't covered in other things. There'll be a lot of things that we'll cover in passant when we talk about electronization, etc. And then we are going to actually use this article by Davenport and talk about using analytics as a tool for competition. And this is these days, this is all what people talk about, is big data and analytics. And basically saying, where can you use analytics to make money? And what techniques you use, and etc. So we'll start with that and put a generic positioning on that. But then we are going to have two classes basically focusing on audit analytics, basically giving you a little window into what we do in our 4-course audit analytics program. I wish I could actually create 3 audit analytics courses for you here and put it in the PA, because I think in 10, 15 years, that's what many of you will be doing. But you have a CPA exam to take, and actually we are very constrained because you have to satisfy MBA requirements and you have to satisfy CPA requirements. And so we are constrained in the number of courses. We are still trying to figure out a way to do that. But in this, I'm going to show you some packages that are available, and I'm going to show you how to think about them, and I'm going to show you some of the research we have done. And this will be those 2 session analytics, and this is kind of a visionary type of thing. We are going to talk about what we call the audit ecosystem, and it's basically bringing together a vision of the audit future and etc. And finally, at the end, we're going to talk about security, privacy, etc., and about the NSA watching you. Okay, and this is not a political thing, not too interested in politics. This is about technology and about what can be observed, what cannot be observed, how this forms big data, and you'll be very surprised. I actually, I'm going to show you a little bit about my vita. I worked for Bell Laboratories, and we had programs with the government. But before the programs with the government, we actually did this inbound, outbound call analysis. And I was very, very surprised about the scope of data collection. And, for marketing reasons, there was a good reason for us to look at who was calling who and when, but was basically divide AT&T customers into categories that you could incentivate with advertising. And you could organize a better way to serve them by having homogeneous clusters of clients. What I really didn't realize, and I knew that the government was using some of this stuff it was obvious to me. But what I was very surprised is the scope of what they were collecting and how they were using. First, I think it's against the law what they were doing. And second, but after, September 11, the interpretation of the law became much laxer because the feeling was there was a threat to the United States. But I think it was against the law. And on the other hand, it was very interesting because they were collecting a whole set of different sources of information that they were not collecting before, and much beyond what they're allowed to do. And that's why I tell you that privacy is gone, but you are protected by volume of information and numbers. That said, it's kind of interesting to look what information is being collected. And don't think that you can take measures to protect yourself. Well, actually think that, because there are some things you can do to protect your privacy. The first thing is look at your settings in Facebook. Okay, be careful who you broadcast to and not. The other thing I always say is if you had a very good time one night with friends and drank a lot and made a fool of yourself, it might be fun to show it to your friends, but your employer will see it too. Okay? So be careful what you post on the web, and don't think that the protection is the fact you didn't say your name, because face recognition and other devices are just there.
What do you think about all these, when you go on websites, they try and sell you VPNs?
You can spend money and protect yourself a little bit. You're going to use Google, aren't you?
Yeah.
Google collects a lot of information about you. The reason why Google is so cheap, meaning free, is because they have other ways to monetize the information they're giving you. Just a couple of things I didn't say here, but we are going to talk about quite a lot, is when we talk electronization, other things. We're going to talk about the Web of Things. And what is the Web of Things is, these days, most of the internet communication is between people and people. And very soon is going to be large majority device to device. And basically your TV, your toaster, your car, and your devices are going to all interface. My watch interface with my iPhone already, and these are going to expand. And the same thing as I said before, unless there is a natural application for it, people are not idealizing some application. This idea that before you come home, your lights in your house get turned out and your oven gets turned on, sounds like a very cool application, but probably not very practical. I don't think a lot of people won't spend a lot of money for that. But watching your baby when you're not home, people will spend a lot of money on that. My wife is Chinese from Hong Kong, and my wife spends hours looking at her house in Long Island because it has cameras and she loves the application. And I said, no one is there, why are you looking at it? You left the light on, she says. But she just thinks that that kind of monitoring it gives her a good feeling that the house is in good shape. And that kind of thing, baby monitoring, your goods monitoring if your husband is behaving, is very big type of applications. The amount of video data out there is unbelievably large. And more of it is going to be transported between devices. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen, as you're going to see very soon, but some things can be inferred. And the other thing is, predicting what's going to happen helps you to think about what's already happening, and you don't know. And that will be very good as business opportunities for your personal lives, for your relationships. So hopefully that will be good. So this is kind of the coverage. As you see, it's a very hybrid course. I teach this course for senior executives and etc., but I don't put XPL, ADS, Audit Analytics on it. So your course is a very heavy accounting-flavored WebLife course. Okay, so this is your house. How do you communicate with the internet from your house? Okay, already very advanced. Okay. Before anything, you were communicating to a telephone. And yeah, you had some kind of internet modem, and it was connected to a computer, correct? The connection from this to the internet was wired and was what we call POTS. POTS stands for plain old telephone system. Twisted copper pairs, okay? Copper wires, okay? And you still use copper wires for electricity, okay? And that was your main connectivity to the internet. With the evolution of the internet, there was demand for faster connectivity. And so they developed DSL and variations of DSL, and that basically was an override on top of copper wires. Then the other thing that came in was your TV and a box on top of your TV. It wasn't developed for internet. This was actually developed for cable TV. And depending on the country, cable TV is very big or reasonably small. There are countries reasonably developed that have 20, 30% penetration of cable TV. Now, that's a little bit of a different technology. And that's called coaxial. So instead of being twisted pair, and twisted pair copper usually could be 2 or 3 wires, coaxial is basically a fat shielding of a cable and 1 wire in the middle. And you know these cables, how do they look, because you connect them into your TV, and they have 1 wire in the middle that if you bend and doesn't get in the hole, you don't get any communication. Okay? Now, this kind of thing is actually interesting. It will give you better speeds of connectivity. Then you get to a POTS line. And many of you may have telephone internet service or may have cable internet service. Now, the other ones that have developed since then is what they call cable satellite TV. And very typically, the satellite TV and satellite internet actually goes in a funny way. You get downstreams from your satellite, and you go upstream to your telephone line. You could also go back to the satellite, but it's inefficient. Okay? Now, there is one more way. Actually, maybe a couple more ways. I don't want to talk about this. Cellular. But what do you notice comparing cellular internet access with, let's say, coaxial internet access? Yeah. Say that a little bit louder. No, they're both ways. You know, you call up and down. But what's faster? Coaxial is much, much faster. You're getting speeds that are 10 to 100 times faster. Cell phones are not very good internet devices, speed-wise, low bandwidth. That's why people are developing separate interfaces for cell phones, because they want to take advantage of the real estate that you have in your cell phone to transmit the most important pieces of the information that are being transmitted. So if you have a computer and you have a cell phone, it might have a different interface, a different app for you to use it. And it goes like this. These are the fastest. This is a little bit less fast. Okay, not much less fast. And this one is the slower. And this is somewhere faster than the cell phone, slower than these two. Now, if you get a provisioner to be Verizon, it's always this kind of communication. Verizon is a telephone company. The last piece, what they call the loop, is typically twisted pair. If you get your service on Time Warner or Cablevision, and they have subsidiaries that provide this service, usually get a little bit faster service. Now, Verizon is now offering a service called FiOS, F-I-O-S, and that's basically telephone company, but instead of having twisted pair here, what they have is fiber. And fiber transmits more information, quote unquote, faster than twisted pair. Now remember, typically when you buy FiOS, your own house is still twisted pair. It's just until the entrance of your house that comes fiber. So it's fast, much faster, no, not much faster, faster than the other ways, okay? But inside your house is not fiber. Now if you have a very modern house and you already fiber enabled it, then you get pretty fast speed. Fiber is much faster. Okay, just very, very simply considering, just talking a little bit about fiber. Fiber is basically glass, and it needs to be grown. It's not melted or something like that. And the way information goes to the glass is lasers. There's a laser in this side going pep, 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 and there is light strings going to the other side. And the other side there is a detector of light strings. And basically it goes yes and no, yes and no. Everything is represented by yes and no's, and that's called digital. And typically you have two fibers, one receiving, the other one sending. Okay. And so that's what fiber is much superior. On the other hand, on a POTS line, what you have is waves. And the modulation of the wave transmits the information, and in a very simplified manner, you approximate the wave in the digital form, but it's not this way. This is just a way to make you understand it. Okay. Now, another thing people don't realize is that anytime you pick up a phone and you talk, you're actually doing both digital and analog. That's the other word. Analog is when there's a wave. Digital when it's zeros and one. And typically your receiver, the modern ones are digital. And you know, they beep, 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 as opposed to the old tone. Okay? And they basically, when they go into the wiring of your house, they are analog. So there is a converter from digital and analog to here. Typically they come out of your house into what they call the loop, meaning from your house to the telephone company's switching station. They are probably analog too. The long distance telephone company has the big wires that are digital. And then you get to the other side, is analog again. And maybe at the end is digital again. So there's a lot of conversion going back and forth. You don't ruin signal too badly by doing that. Are you understanding this? Okay, this is simplified. It's not totally technically correct, but it's a good way. This will explain, you're going to notice things, and it will explain to you what you're observing. And so we actually talked about this. Don't be worried. Remember, I don't drill and don't do multiple choices. So, but it's kind of good for you to understand. DSL and ISDN on top of ports. Coaxial is cable TV. And then there is the wireless. Now, one thing for you to understand is wireless, again, is slower than the other two. Slower means less bandwidth. Think about bandwidth as a tube. If the tube is very small, very little water passes through it. If the tube is fat, more water passes through it. And the other thing is that a lot of people are doing storage over the cloud. What does that mean? Things like Dropbox and Box or et cetera, basically saying you can store things in the cloud and use it in your device. What's good about that? What's bad about that? But locally you pay too, correct? Meaning you buy a local storage device, costs you $200. Okay, 1 terabyte. And so local costs you too. I think the costs of cloud storage are going to be cheaper than your house very soon. But there is a big problem. You have a lot of data here. You want to put a lot of data there. Between here and there, it has to be transmitted. And that goes very narrow domain. Okay, the wireless or even wired transmission to your house is reasonably low band. I bought 1 terabyte of information on the cloud, and it's taking me weeks to transmit everything to store there. So that's one of my problems. I'm a little bit worried that, maybe going back to Tom, I think the evidence is that it's reasonably secure to be in the cloud. There hasn't been a lot of break-ins. But in practice, I'm kind of worried about my personal pictures, about Google scanning to my devices. God knows what's happening in the cloud. Google has very cheap storage. And for about $100 a year, you can get $120 a year, you get a terabyte of information, which is a lot of information. I'm uncomfortable on not being with me, but I think that's because I'm old-fashioned. You know, I think they are professional. They do it better managed than they. I just had a big crisis personally. I have this nice computer, and it has a RAID facility at home. It's a big computer. And a RAID is basically this drive that's backed up automatically. Okay, I also, because I'm very obsessive about backups, I always copy it into an external hard drive. My computer did one of these Microsoft updates, and it froze and never woke up. Automatic wake-ups. So I did everything I could. I did a lot of tricks. I managed to wake it up. Hardware is there, but I couldn't get into Windows. Literally. I did everything. I actually got into Windows and stopped at a certain point. And I did every trick I could, and I've done it many times. So I gave it to the computer support guys here, and after 2 weeks, they gave it back to me, installed new Windows on it, every single application I had to reinstall, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2 days. Okay? And my backups were not back there. Fortunately, I had an external backup, so I maybe lost 1 day of activity. Not even that, because I use Dropbox, and my most recent files sit in Dropbox. So I was saved a little bit by my day-to-day activity. 2 weeks without my desktop, because I had everything 26 gig sitting in Dropbox. But the backing up situation is something, we're going to talk more about this, but I just ask you right now, tell you right now, every semester I have someone sobbing at the end of the semester, the middle of the semester, I lost all my data, and this and that, okay? And you have to do something to make very sure, and you say, I don't have anything I want to save. And then I say, how about your pictures, your girlfriend's pictures, your dog, your grandchild? You have grandchild, of course, correct? How about music that you captured somewhat marginally, meaning illegally, okay? How about little films that you filmed? How about that spreadsheet that you prepared with your friends? How about your stuff about your fantasy football? Very important stuff, okay? And so you always need to back you up. And when they answer, I have a stick, and I put stuff in there, I said, that's not so good. I have a stick. This is a 1 terabyte stick. It's a big stick. Doesn't look big, correct? Okay? But this is not a very good storage device. Okay? I was in Brazil, and we do this project with largest bank in Brazil, number 10, bigger than Citibank, called Itaú Unibanco. And they want to put 6 gig in here. Their computer and my stick couldn't talk to each other. Got so big files, even this big storage, it doesn't talk to each other. We tried every trick on the book. But they have this thing not to transfer data out. So employees cannot take data out on stick. He has an override, but the override is not complete. So he couldn't get it. So don't back up on a stick. Let us put it this way. If you have to back up on a stick, it's better than nothing. But, you have to manage it every day. And I said, the other thing is the backups that, the software that comes in Microsoft or comes with the backup drives is not very good. Keep an eye on what you're collecting. But one thing I'll tell you is immediately, like go up today, and I'm going to have you a little assignment saying how I back up my files. Okay. Now, one more interesting thing about backups that we might want to talk for a second. There is this cloud backups that are your music. Do they store your music for you? what do they do, Wong?
They have basically one copy and then everybody shares.
That's right. In order to save space, and for obvious reasons, what they do is they figure out, and they have more than one copy, but they figure out, they have a library of music. Okay, and each one has a number or whatever, a code. And when you put your music there, they basically identify the code, and whenever you want, you get served of that music. Okay, and so if this whole class is storing the libraries, there'll be a lot of overlap, and they'll be saving a lot of space. By the way, that's very nice, it's very convenient, and etc., except not everything is there. I have a lot of Brazilian music, they don't have it all there. So yeah, I can't store many of that stuff. Also, they charge money. Sometimes not. If you buy it to Amazon or to Apple, your music, they'll have permanent backups for you over there. They're just listed. But all these things come with caveats, and you have to think about that. You guys read a lot of books. You know, I used to talk to my students, and I said, e-books are coming. They used to always tell me, I like a book, a physical book. I want books in my bookshelf. I want to mark them up. And I bet you many of you feel that way still. But a lot of you buy Kindle books. There are more Kindle books sold than real books. Kindle books or other variations. How many of you don't buy Kindle books, don't buy electronic books? A lot of you, huh? Conservative class. How many of you buy a lot of Kindle books? Oh, you buy both? Oh, how much of you acquire Kindle books? Oh, I see. Okay. And actually, that's an interesting phenomenon because, by the way, have you noticed that your behavior with Kindle books is very different with regular books? What's different? You're saying yes. What's the difference?
I feel like I read a lot more. They're like addictive.
Do you read in the bathroom? Kindle books?
Every single time,
Yeah. Of course. You read one of the biggest behavior changes with electronic books is that you get to read the book all the time. You know, you're waiting in the bus stop. You have a boring date. You are waiting the doctor. You're just bored in class. You open a book. Actually, people thought that electronic books will decrease people's reading. No. The other thing is people thought the internet actually making people more literate, but not what you consider literate. You know, they see two teenagers texting between themselves, and you read it, you can't understand it, the jargon in it. And so, of course, if you're a French purist about protecting a language, that's sacrilege. Okay? But in reality, that's most people now read and write. Why? Because they need it for internet. Okay, in the past, you know, we had a big problem here at Rutgers, even when I got here, is that many of our students coming to class as undergraduates were functionally illiterate. Couldn't read and write well, couldn't understand. People do improve their understanding a lot. And some of you may not recognize the lingo they use, but it's a communication lingo. It's totally legitimate. I don't feel that purist about the language, although I don't like bad spelling. But if you can communicate, it's good. If you cannot communicate, it's bad. Now, back to backups. So what are your alternatives for backups? Cloud. Spend a lot of money, put it in the cloud. Have the risk, which is not a proven risk, of being exposed. What is the second alternative? Google? No, that's cloud. Google is cloud. Local, yeah. Now, what are your alternatives locally? External hard drive. Ugly, correct? But that's what probably most people worried about their data. The problem with the external hard drives, first they crash on you, you lose the data. The second thing, but that's not very likely, The second thing, over the years, magnetic media deteriorates. Okay, so you keep it for 10, 15 years, becomes more difficult to read. The third thing is you need a whole management system to bring data in and out. If you buy different disk drives, they might have different recall algorithms. You have to be careful that you continue with the programs that you can capture, and they work with different operating systems. Yeah, there is a whole set of problems that you might run into it. But I would still say my recommendation at this moment, spend $100, get yourself an external drive. At least that way you are sure that things are okay. You can get a stick for 1 terabyte for about $60. Half terabyte for about $35. So that's the alternative. I don't like it. I think sticks are not so comfortable, not so reliable. But, you know, it's better than... Most important thing, backup. Second most important thing, well, maybe the first, is have a method to backup. Meaning, because you don't want to forget things and etc. You don't want to go from here to Brazil like I do, get there, your computer being dead, and you have lost a lot of things that you never had backup. So you need a methodology to every night or every hour or every week to have a good copy of everything you have. Remember that Windows, same thing about Apple, maybe a little bit less, that Windows places things in different places in your disk. So just because you stored your My Documents doesn't mean you stored your mail, doesn't mean that you stored your music, doesn't mean you stored your other things. You have to be very aware where things sit and putting away. This is kind of primitive computing. In the future, I hope this is not going to be the case. There'll be some global directories that manage it all for you. But at this moment, it is not there. But guys, please make sure that you go home tonight and you think how backed up you are. Okay? And spend some time on that, because I'm not the one going to pay for it if you don't. And I guarantee you there'll be 1 or 2 people here in this class that by the end of this year are going to have lost substantive amount of data. But, you know, if you back up, you'll recover it. That's my backup discussion. One more thing. Safe computing. The world is full of viruses. What are the main cares that you need to take? I'm not talking people viruses, I'm talking about computer viruses. Yes. Louder, louder. Have an updated antivirus. Have an antivirus that's active, and further make sure that it didn't stop updating its profiles. That's the first most important thing. Now, if you have to disable it for one reason or the other, enable it back as fast as you can. Okay? By the way, if you get infected and your virus detector cannot detect it, you just go to, there are a pile of free virus detectors in the internet. You pick one of them up, look it up, see which one is the best at that moment, and run it to your computer. If disabled your computer, then it's a whole different story. You need to do something else. But it's doable. Viruses are manageable to a certain degree. So the first thing is have a virus detector program, have it enabled on your computer. What else?
Don't open unknown links in emails?
Absolutely. That's the second thing to be said. Get an email with an attachment. Don't know where it came from, don't know who sent it to you, don't click on it. Absolutely don't click on it. If a friend of yours sends you a file that you didn't expect, it's no offense to send me, did you send me a file, an email, see if he answers you. Okay? Because people have been creating rogue lists of addresses, and these could be, some in the list could be your friends, and basically the email address is not his email address. So don't click answer to it, did you send this to me? If is there a URL that you want to link on, don't click on the URL, type it in. Because there are control characters in URLs and etc. that will direct it to some place else. So be very careful answering phishing or etc. etc. Some of them are very compelling. You get this email saying, you are running out of this space. Click here to resolve this problem. Never. Banks, etc., will send emails. They never ask you to click on anything. They will tell you some information about your account that other people won't know and say connect to my bank. But don't click on them. So those are the basic two cares. If someone gives you a stick to read, the stick could always be infected. Okay, make very sure that your device is on and active. Okay, I'm going to give you next week a stick with all the materials or a good part of the materials we're going to cover here. I would be surprised if my stick starts clean, starts dirty. I think it'll be clean. But you read it, several of you read it, someone might be infected, it might go into the stick. So make very sure that your virus detector is on and live. Okay, but being infected is not that difficult. The other thing is there is a lot of software being offered over the internet for free, and you want to do something, you find all the free software. Be careful what you pick up. If there's a piece of software, your friends used it, was decent, you pick it up. It's created by Microsoft or other one of the good vendors. You can trust it in general. Make sure you go to Microsoft is not someone pretending to, meaning creating a screen that looks exactly like Microsoft email is very easy. So just go to the Microsoft website and then drill down to it. Okay, but on the other hand, there are a lot of softwares being offered on the internet that are free, but comes with offers of other products and etc. And some of them try to force you to use the other product and basically block you out of everything. I went skiing with my family last Christmas, and my son's computer basically kept forcing him to use a website and basically blocked everything else. Took me 2 days to clean it up for him. I had to go do the thing that I was just telling you, go and find another virus that was free, installing it in their computer, and then I even had to kind of run it through a stick because I couldn't install it. It had been blocked. So it was non-trivial to clean it up. Okay, so be very careful. There are a lot of software being offered in the public domain. If you're not sure about a software, pick up the name, go on Google and see what they say about it. And remember, all these self-evaluations on the web are self-evaluations, correct? So you go and say, people that bought from this vendor, commenting, and then there are, this is fantastic, this is beautiful, etc. Who wrote that? Themselves. Okay? So don't rely on one person or two persons saying this is great. Okay? You have to kind of find another way to verify it. By the way, many of these public softwares are rated in places like PC Magazine. There are a pile of these things that you can use to evaluate them. And this is good advice. And, when in doubt, don't do it. In doubt, don't do it. Spending the next 2 days cleaning up your computer is not something you particularly want to do. And then, every time that happens, you say, Jesus, I got infected. Did my backups get infected? Okay, sometimes virus comes in, takes a little while to manifest it. And while it's manifesting itself, it's propagating. So be careful. But that's the two things, backup and virus infestation. Why do you think, just kind of interpretive question here, why do you think that there are still viruses around, they haven't been eliminated? There are some evolutionary viruses, but that's another thing can be the viruses on. Why do you think that there are continuing being viruses? Yeah.
People create new viruses to create new antivirus.
Okay, so there is kind of a constant evolution. This is like evolutionary science, Darwinian science. There is an evolution. What else? Yeah.
So if there's a lot of money in it, you could create a virus and then be the one that takes the virus off people's computer, the ultimate ransom.
You know, my generic feeling that although there is a lot for profit bad behavior on the internet, large majority is just some hacker wanting to have some fun. I think they haven't monetized very well yet the negative behavior. There are some areas that have. I have to agree with you. And why haven't the virusing companies come up with a perfect way to control it?
Because they can't sell the antivirus if there's no virus.
No, but interesting thought. I like it. I think the reason is that all operating systems, all pieces of software keep changing what they do. Basically, what the people at AT&T used to say, features sell products, but people don't use the features. So it's very, you could create a very old piece of software that you really protected it, and maybe some new things would come out, but to be very protected. But they are constantly updating. It's much more fixes and new versions of software, version 2.3.2, because people keep adding features, and then the features don't work as well as you expected. So basically, the multiplicity of software and software versions make it nearly makes it impossible to bulletproof anything. And the other thing is you cannot think in advance what everyone will do. And very often, when you design a piece of software, you already put some backdoors or some ways to go and fix it if you don't go in there. And those backdoors get explored. So it's kind of a long thing. Don't expect that in our lifetime there'll be big solution to this. Now, we already talked about these two things. Analog versus digital, copper versus fiber versus coaxial. These are called transports. Wireless, cellular, Wi-Fi, and fixed wireless. And as you notice, I didn't talk too much about fixed wireless. Fixed wireless was that two pizza boxes that take care of the last mile. There had been technology developed. Basically, you don't need wiring to go into your house, but you're using wired up to the terminal. And basically what they did is they created some private channels to go. And that solution, although has been tried in several cities, didn't pick up very much. I think economics was not there. Now, this is another very interesting thing. About 5 or 6 companies created satellite networks to basically give telecommunication to people. And the most famous one was Iridium from Motorola. And basically what has happened is that they went bust. And they were bust because putting satellites up is very expensive. And second, the devices to talk to satellites were big devices. My daughter called me. She was covering the war in Kosovo and in doing a film. And she managed to get some guy from the European force there to lend him her satellite telephone. And it was about this big and cost $6 a minute to use it. It was free because it was being paid by the military. But because of that, these things basically, people have cell access much cheaper in many other places. Why would they do it? However, military applications, and by the way, finish up with Iridium, they went bust. The military basically bought it. And now because the military need something without infrastructure, because you're bombing someplace, you're destroying the infrastructure, destroying the towers. They need a way whereby they can communicate without infrastructure. And so it's perfect military application. Other countries have the networks too. But it wasn't very, very practical. I think when the technology evolves, it might come back. And I think it will be a hybrid situation. You have satellites and you have land and you mix the two of them together. I think that will be more likely. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the backbones. Okay, I want to explain to you what packet switching is. Okay, in old days, if I called Mohammed on the phone, what happened is I was here And I picked up my receiver, and my receiver went to a switchboard. Someone asked me, who do you want to talk to? And I would say, Muhammad. So she would pick up, or he would pick up a wire and connect my connection, my hole here, to Muhammad's hole, and let me talk with Muhammad. Okay? Physical interconnection. So I had a physical interconnection to Muhammad, and people that could talk to each other had to be with this physical wire type of thing. And progressively these things here became automated, and they become electromechanic switches. And so you needed some kind of denotation that this was Muhammad. So what they did is they gave people telephone numbers. And what actually happened traditionally is, this guy, Thomas Edison, was a big advocate of the telephone. Some people said that he invented it. Okay, there has been phenomena like the telephone or devices like telephone developed by many people. But the guy was a genius in promoting and convincing people to use it. And so he went out and he tried to sell his device to Western Union. Have you ever heard of Western Union? Okay, Western Union was the biggest telecommunication company of the world at that stage. It's around early 1900, 1993. And Western Union said, who wants a telephone? We are not going to do this. We do telegraphs, and telegraph makes a lot of money for us. Why would we use this thing? So he actually didn't get very far with them, but his technology were compelled. The idea of picking up a device and talking to your girlfriend or to your child or to your friend next door is a very strong, compelling idea. People want to do that, and people spend money to that. The other thing is, remember, you want to send a message to someone a mile away from your house 120 years ago. You had to get out and walk for a mile or 10 miles, or you have to wait the post office to deliver it. Okay? Or you would ask someone to give a message, and the person would walk there himself. The idea of picking up a receiver is very, very powerful. So he actually started managed to sell the technology to some people. He actually sold devices too. And so they created these telephone companies. And there were some very small telephone companies, some that grew bigger. And basically there is a rule that says that telecommunications is worth the square number of users. What does that mean? Is that if you have one device, is worth 1. You have 10 devices, is worth 100. You have 100 devices, is worth 10,000. Okay, so obviously the value, just think about this, obvious. You are going to buy a telecommunication device. If you can talk only for a few people, it's not as useful as if you can talk to many people. So the big fat companies, the larger companies, wouldn't allow the small companies to interconnect. Why? Because the customer would say, those guys I can talk with everyone, with these guys I can't. So the small companies started to languish. Then the US government did a good thing. The US government said, AT&T, you can be a monopoly. Meaning, you can control telephone numbers, but you have to have one standard, and you have to allow the smaller companies to interconnect. So these ICOs, independent companies, as we call them at AT&T, started interconnecting with AT&T, created the area codes, created the numbers, and the US telephone service was by far the best telephone service in the world until divestiture, until the courts forced AT&T to break up, and AT&T kept this central business, the long-distance business, and the operating companies like Verizon, Bell South, and et cetera, kept the local business. And they were basically told that you can do long distance, but then it has to be competitive. Turns out that I was at AT&T, but before that, AT&T had 1.2 million employees. When they divested, of the operating companies. They finished up having about 350,000 employees. Came a point that AT&T had 30,000 employees. The business, they started competing with Sprint and MCI, and the business was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And in reality, what happened is that cellular became a big competitor, and they knew this was happening. Actually, AT&T today is not AT&T anymore, was Bell South, and a couple of other companies that merged and bought AT&T out. But when that divestiture happened, the quality of telephone service in the U.S. deteriorated rapidly. So, the government doesn't always do stupid things. The government does some very smart things. And by the way, the U.S. government did another very smart thing with the internet. The U.S. government basically was financing the long-distance lines of the internet, what we call the T3 lines, or the backbone of the internet. And in, 1994, they basically said, we are not paying for this anymore, let the companies pay for it. We're going to work on data compression. And so basically, they created a market mechanism to pay for the internet as opposed to being part of your taxes. And it was a very smart device. They did it. The U.S. internet is still among the best in the world, although some other countries have done quite well. Now, when I finished calling Mohammed here, I still had this line. So they decided that it would be nicer to allow a line to do more things, particularly here in the middle. So they started this thing called packet switching. They basically, I send a message to Mohammed. I was talking to Mohammed. It was broken down, my talk, into little pieces. They're electronic pieces, so they go in very little pieces. And instead of being to a switch, it goes to routers. And the packet gets sent here, then when sent here, then comes to me. And so instead of being a line connected, there is a line there, but there are many pieces of packets going to the line. It's just breaking the communication up. And typically, Mohammed is talking from here until the switch. The line is only his, or from here to the local point in his neighborhood. But then these lines get shared. And of course, the internet does the same thing. So one is line switching. You basically connect the wires. The other one is your wire is always connected, and you get packets into it. And the internet is a packet switching device. And the U.S. government is more than paying for the public lines. The government actually financed the internet startup. Tell you the story about that. Also interesting story. The government financed, there is a thing called ARPA, Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA, A-R-P-A. And there is a thing called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. ARPA, there's a professor, Kleinrock, at UCLA when I was there, that actually developed this ability of two computers talking to each other. And then other professors developed other devices, and it was obvious that you could connect computers to computers, and it would be useful to do that. So the ARPA gave him a grant, he applied for a grant, and he developed this ARPA network. The ARPA network was actually a few universities, prime universities, MIT, UCLA, etc., that had wires between them, and they transmitted communication. Two types of ways. One, you would connect to the computer in the other place. The other one is send a message to the other place. And this was very interesting, and so a whole set of universities joined ARPANET, and that was great. Then, university that didn't get ARPA money got upset and jealous and created BitNet. And BitNet had more nodes than ARPANET, and they were connected using basically the same technology, but other protocols. So one couldn't talk to the other. And then Wang Computers and a couple of them started creating their own protocols of communication. And there are two types of communication, local area network, LAN, and wide area type of communication, WAN. Okay? But this was kind of craziness. This type of network here, that type of network there, that type. Same phenomenon that I was telling you about telephone. people with different network disorganized and etc. So the U.S. government had a very sobering discovery. AT&T was the monopoly. If an atomic bomb would be thrown somewhere in the outskirts of D.C., 80% to 90% of the U.S. telephone network would be disrupted and destroyed because the big interlocking switches were sitting over there. So they wanted a networking schemata that wasn't so prone to destruction. And by the way, it's not such a bad idea to, instead of having 100 different protocols, have one. So they created this idea, the internetworking protocol. What is the internetting? Oh, I lost every pen I had here. Internetworking protocol was basically to bring BitNet together with ARPANET, together with other things. So here it is. This is ARPANET. This is BitNet. And so they had, let's kind of pull them together in a common address. So they said, let's put another computer here. And this computer speaks TCP/IP. Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. Okay? And we've got another computer here that speaks TCP/IP. So there's a translation here, and these two can talk to each other. And then we can put others speaking TCP/IP, and they will all be talking the same language. Government financed, very simple protocol, very robust protocol. People started saying, you know, why am I using WANG here, or why am I using BitNet? What I'll do is I'll put TCP/IP here and here and here and here. No transmission, no connection, and etc. And the thing spread like wildfire. Very interesting. And by the way, IP, Internet Protocol, is a number. And is a number with 4 components smaller than 256. So the number could be 200, 100, 51. Okay? And every time you connected on the internet to a wire, you got one of these numbers. Actually, if in this room has a fixed IP number, because it has a wire coming into the wiring of the computing in Rutgers and internet access. So this is a fixed IP number, one number like this. Okay, and there is some logic to the world. And the logic is there is a centralized table of IP numbers, and every country gets a certain range of IP numbers, and they allocate to the different companies, different individuals, etc. Everyone has their IP number. So there is someone here at Rutgers that allocates the IP numbers of the range to different places in the world, fixed IPs. But then some guys like you became trouble because you wanted use your laptops to wireless. So you are not connecting on the wall. So they created this dynamic IP allocation. Dynamic IP allocation. What does that stand for? Means you open your computer, you press a button, and it says, I want IP. And Wi-Fi gives you the IP. So they need to have a range of numbers for you to use it. Correct? Every time you log in, you get a different IP number. Unless coincidentally you got the same, but you get a different IP number. Now, that's very great, correct? You can connect from anywhere at Rutgers into your thing, but causes problems. What is the problem? That in old days, I connected to the internet, they knew who I was, or at least where I was, because it was a fixed allocation. Now anyone can, in Rutgers, connect to that, if he's a Rutgers member, etc., connect to that IP number. So there were, and for a while it was like 80% fixed IPs, 20% dynamic IPs. Guess what it is now? compare. There is one fixed IP in this room. There are probably, how many are? 41. There are probably 100 different IP locations. Yeah, Michael just showed me his computer and his device. By the way, 2 devices is little. You know, go to my house, there are 100. Okay, and just think about when all the refrigerators and all the ovens and your shoes, and hey, you're going to be wearing this. You know what this is? Everyone knows what this is. Wearable device. We're going to talk about wearable devices. We're talking about Internet of Things. We are going to talk about devices in general. Okay, but this kind of dynamic IP allocation creates a little bit of a problem. Because when you connect on the internet, they want to know who you are. And when you go into Bloomingdale's electronical, you go to FAO Schwartz, or you go to whatever you use it, JP Penney's, they want to know who you are, even if they don't know exactly who you are. And so this whole thing is evolving. Now back to the TCP/IP, these things started being interconnected. The protocol spread very rapidly. Everyone got numbers. But we are running out of numbers because everyone has too many devices. And if you think like 256 to the 256 to the 256 to the 256 is a lot of numbers. Okay, it's still not enough. So they are expanding into 2 more sets of numbers, and this will take care of things for a while. Okay, this progressive change that's happening. But for you to remember is that every time you connect, you actually get a number. And very soon we are going to talk a little bit about that. And this is the TCP/IP protocol story. One more good thing that the US government did. Very good thing that they did. They are not dumb on it. Okay, next thing is domain names. Okay, you guys really don't want to remember 200.100.56.3, correct? For the fixed IP things. You prefer to remember Amazon.com. Correct? So they started creating this thing called domain names and subdomain names. And typically is Amazon.com, and often you put in the front something like www. Okay? But very often you don't put that in there. Now, in theory, it goes like this. This is the name of the computer. This is the domain. And this is a subdomain. This is the domain name. And so somewhere in the sky, there is a list of all .coms. And every time it finds Amazon, it gives you a number back. So this is a domain name server, DNS, domain name server, and say that Amazon is 122.11.2.1, just making up a number. Okay, so there is a long table in the .com server which says domain names here and IP numbers here. So the first time you plug into Amazon or to any website, it takes a little longer. Why? Because it's going to the domain name server, finding the IP number and bring it down. And sometimes you can see in your URL, in your browser, the number, not the name. It just happens. Or you can type in the number, would work too. If you are too lazy to wait until DNS gets looked up, you can type in the number. And there are some situations you type in the number, you can have private servers that are not in the list. There are reasons why you might want to do that. But for you to understand clearly, every domain name has an equivalent IP number. Okay? And when you start to go to a domain, it looks it up in a domain server. If you use Andromeda here, or any of the other computers, they typically have a domain server in their own computer. It's not a big deal. It's just a big list of names and IP numbers. Okay, and they are smart enough to say, if I don't know, I'll go to the .com server. If I don't know that, I go somewhere else to check it. And they always find the domains if the domain exists. If you misspell, they don't find it. And some of them are even smart enough to suggest, did you mean to say Amazon, not Amazon? Or something like that. So sometimes many of you might just go into Google and click on the name as opposed to typing it directly on the browser because it's less effort. You guys are very good at saving effort, which is good, correct? Very good, because these things are a little bit techy and a little bit anachronistic. You know, many of these things, if we designed today, wouldn't be designed this way. But, you know, the internet is a very brilliant thing. And just talking to you a little bit for you to understand some of these things. First thing is this, what I call the backbone of the internet, is the very fat, wide bandwidth cables of fiber that carry the entire internet. And in reality, there is not one backbone on the internet. There are hundreds of backbones of the internet. But each country has its main ways, and then there are the cables under the ocean, and there are the things going around Africa, and there are the things going through the Strait of Ortiz and whatever. They are these big, fat cables carrying things. And, you know, say, oh, but with wireless, no, wireless doesn't have the bandwidth that, you know, would the internet exist only with wireless? Sure, but it would be very slow. Okay, so you always want a big fat cable. And this is what the US financed until 94. And basically, to simplify for you to understand, there are these, forget about the speeds, etc., they got much faster. There are these channels coming out. And there is the NAPs, Network Access Points, which are the places that you get into the backbone. And there are companies like Verizon or whatever selling access to the internet. And then there are these guys who provide you internet service access. They might be the NAPs, they might not be. And then associated with that, there is you in there. And who are you? Either the consumer using a service provider or companies using the internet. And remember about the atomic bomb in the outskirts of DC? Each one of these things have a secondary channel, sometimes a tertiary channel. So if this thing is not available, it tries to go somewhere else, tries to go somewhere else. So, you know, it's very seldom that the internet goes kaput. It basically browns out, slows down. And when it slows down, basically means that some of the local channels went bad. You know, during the hurricane in New York City, you could see your internet going slower. But unless you went the whole area went black and the communication went black, you still got internet. I could use internet when it was dark in my house, and my cell phone didn't work very well, but my internet connection was working. It's through cable, and cable worked. You had a question there in the back. Who had a question? Yeah, yeah. This is not a direct line to backbone, but I don't know. I don't know. Just put one here saying that there is a potential. Okay. You have a problem with this? We can pretend this is not here. Actually, I don't remember why I put it there. There have to be a reason. It was 15 years ago. Yeah. By the way, I like these questions. Please continue them. Say that again, Namita.
Different government entities, like social welfare, different kinds of, they set up their own human access lines. So that can be considered consumer.
Yeah, like the government, gov.govs and etc. There are people, that kind of type of thing, all very, very large consumer individuals that are willing to pay for NAP access for some reason or the other. Yeah. Okay, let's kind of talk about T-lines for a second. A T1 line and a T3 lines is a kind of a vestige of the past. Okay, the way that you transmitted twisted pairs over space is that you had a little white pair here, another little pair here. You put 28 of them together in a fatter cable, which was about this thick. And then you put 24 of those together in a fatter cable, and you had the T3 lines. So it was kind of anachronistic type of thing, physical lines everywhere. Okay, and what has happened is that they transformed the notation T1 and T3 into kind of the modern version of speed equivalent. So just think about T1 being much faster than a regular line, T3 being much faster and fatter than the other. It's a visualization. And by the way, the standards in the US and Europe are different, and now in Asia are different. So how many twisted pairs are in each cable is really relevant. And when people sell you T1 X's, they're not really selling you 28 twisted pairs. What they are selling you is some kind of device, maybe a fiber optics device, etc., gives you a better speed. And very often the limitation of the line from your house to the station is not really your cable limitation, is them managing the access points. This is very easy to understand. If you have this fat of a channel, and 2 of you are using it, you get this fat of a channel. If 25 are using it, you get a very narrow channel. And so you'll notice that when people are home, your home access gets slower. Okay? And even if people get T1 lines, they have the same phenomenon. And you want to use your computer real fast, use it in the middle of the night, except when they are doing maintenance, because they do all the maintenance that way. But I think this chart explains a little bit what the story is here. Okay, and each node has an identifier, that's an IP number, and of course, each person gets their access number, and you can use different type of software in it. Now, you need to understand this, and this will put the story together. This is you. And you request a web page. Let's say you're asking for www.amazon.com. By the way, just for reminding you, Andromeda.rutgers.edu. What's the computer you guys use? Your addresses at Rutgers are what? Huh? Scarlet Mail. Okay, Scarlet Mail is a computer, Rutgers edu. So the domain name is edu, the subdomain name is Scarlet Mail, and this thing is, the subdomain is Rutgers. This thing is the name of the computer, Scarlet Mail, or Pegasus here in Newark, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, this has a history to it. When they started putting computers on the net, they were specialized services, Kermit service, and etc. And so in order to tell your computer what to do, you would give it a name. And one of the services was www. But then they started using, and so they had one computer allocated to web services. Now, most computers are web services, so you don't have to say web service, just say the name of the computer. Okay, and if you type in Amazon.com, they are actually looking up www.amazon.com. It's assuming that. Okay, so that's not part here. So here it is. You are asking to a packetized message for myyahoo.com. I think that's the example I have there. And then this thing goes into the domain server that I mentioned here, finds the IP number for myyahoo.com. Okay, the IP number is returned to you. So now you go and ask for the page you want. But be careful. You say, I visited the website is wrong. You don't visit a website. You ask to be served by a website. No big problem saying I visit a website, but you actually, the reason why I always correct that is because for you to understand what you're doing. What at this moment you're doing is you are requesting that the server serves you a page. And that's very different than you going in there. All what you do is send them a message that is packetized, and it says, oh, she wants this, and then it goes to you. Okay? So a web page is requested to the IP number. Now the server in the other side, Amazon or Yahoo, returns you your request. But a page that you see on the screen, a page is not one file. It's many files. You might have a picture in there, you might have a voice imprint of there, you might have several textual files in there. So you ask for a page, you might get 10 files back. Each file might be packetized in many little packets. So what you get back is a big stream, and this big stream travels to the internet through a thing called routers. Here is the internet. There are routers here. You are here. Website is here. And it goes, I ask for a packet, and it sends me back many, many packets. I ask for a page, it sends me many packets. And what TCP does is reassemble this into a page. So packet arrives, the other packet arrives, put together a file, put together several files, you get a page. So sometimes you wait for a long time, is because all the packets didn't arrive, and it has a way to confirm that I received it or not. Now, there is a difference here on the story, because some types of files, some types of pages, work fine if you don't get all the packets back. Music, streaming type of things, video, will work reasonably well without some of the packets. So after a reasonable amount of time, it doesn't wait anymore. And you notice when you're asking for streaming video or for music, it buffers for a little while. What does that mean? It waits for until it gets enough things that can start serving it, and the other ones are accumulating it. So it takes a little time, and while you're watching it, more is coming and more is coming, but it doesn't come directly to your screen, it goes to a buffering device. Okay, so typically music and video doesn't fully require everything to arrive. Textual files, emails require everything to arrive because you don't want words missing or et cetera, et cetera. So that's, for you to understand what's happening, is kind of interesting. So many files are returned. The files were in packets. Each packet, many files are served. Each packet is thrown back into the net towards. When all packets are received, file is reassembled. Several reaffirmed files form their own page. So remember the hierarchy. You have bits and bytes. Okay, the bits and bytes compose packets. The packets compose files. The files compose pages. Clear? Bits and bytes, packets. What comes after packets? Files. And files compose pages. The files could be textual, could be video, could be sound. You can invent some other things. They're all bits and bytes at the end, but that's what it is. And that kind of explains, if you understand this, you understand what's happening in most of the case. Okay, now this is very important for marketing reasons. You want to measure the level of interaction of a client with you. So you have these denominations. A hit is when you download a file. A page is when you download many files that compose a page. A visit, what is a visit? A page is several files that compose a screen for you. Okay? So what is a visit?
How many times you were served?
Now, is a time that you went to a particular website and do a series of queries to the website. The problem is that website never knows if you're going to ask something else or not. You go in website, you click here, you get another page, then you click here, you get another page, and you don't know when it stopped. because you might just leave your computer on and then in half an hour you come back. Or you might go in from GM and then go to Ford and then go to Chevrolet. Okay, so a visit is going to a website. The other terminology they use in marketing is a visitor, meaning a person. And the other terminology is unique visitors. What is a unique visitor is a different, you can visit a website 10 times. And it can be defined that a visit is something that this particular access was in the last 20 minutes or in the last hour or in the last 2 hours. It's difficult to measure this thing. Now, why do many websites have passwords associated with it? Your first intuition is, well, it's because I want to restrict who comes in. Do you think that JCPenney's or Amazon want to restrict who comes in? No. You think Google wants to restrict who comes in? No. Why do they put passwords? Because they want to find out who you are, correct? That's what they want to do. They want to know how to you are. Why? Because they want to advertise to you. They want to identify you. They can make money by identifying you. That's what it is. Now, what is the idea of a cookie?
Cookies are put into the computer, like when you click on something, and they're stored there, and they remember which sites you visit and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's residual information left in your computer. So for example, an example is that you go into Amazon or in some other website and you have a password. And basically they leave the password, the vestige of the password in your computer. So next time you go in, it identifies that, oh, you already have been there and this is you. Okay, so it's something that they leave there. And cookies can be malignant too. You can leave cookies behind that will cause destruction. So there has to be certain protocol about what is in a cookie, etc., or maybe not malignant, but revealing information about you. So there are rules about what a cookie is, etc. But the one thing for you to understand is a cookie is some information left by a website in your computer. It's an accepted protocol, so many websites leave cookies. And the question what the cookie does is defines if they are bad cookies or good cookies. If you are highly paranoid, you set up your browser in a way that doesn't allow cookies. What that will do is a lot of services are not going to work very well for you, or they're not going to work at all. In general, today, cookies are not particularly dangerous. Okay, they have been managed. There was a time that cookies were creating a lot of problems. Remember what I said 5 minutes ago? I said that fixed IP numbers are a rarity today. It's really dynamic IP allocation. By the IP, they don't know who you are, so they have to identify another way. The other thing is the IP itself tells something about you. Basically, what geography you are, maybe even what organization you are. Companies like IBM, AT&T, Rutgers, sometimes put big routers in the front of themselves and have one IP number and then distribute it inside your house with different IP numbers that are not the official IP numbers of the web. I bet you that 99% of you have routers at home. Does anyone here doesn't have a router yet at home? Maybe you just guys got it recently. But what is a router is a little box that you connect to the modem and basically allows you to have Wi-Fi in your house or it connected with a wire on it. And what that router does is gets one IP in and then creates internal IPs for everything. And when your message is sent out, it knows that that message come back to you. Okay? And so that's what a router is. And many of you might have a router at home and might have some retransmitter at home, basically to make the range longer, etc. Might have signal enhancers. Most of you will use wireless communication in your house, but some of you, the house have thick wires and that's not good, so you use wires, use the electric wiring of the house for transmitting information. So you basically put the wires router, put a router here, connect it into the wall, and in the next room you have a little transmitter in the other side. So there are many ways to transmit signal in your house, wireless. But the number you have inside your house typically is not the IP number that's being allocated. The other thing is you work with Time Warner or with Verizon that gives you internet access. They don't give you the same IP number constantly. Why? Because they're afraid that you become a business and pay customer rates, consumer rates as opposed to business rates. So every week or every 2 weeks, they change your IP number. It's just kind of a pain. Correct? Creates a lot of difficulties, but they always do that. And what sometimes happens is that when that IP number changes, you get a little bit of difficulties. Now it got a little bit better. You know, I have to fiddle. Do you remember how many times you had to call the provider and they say, turn your computer off, turn the modem off, turn everything off, and they start one by one by one? That's probably because your IP number got interrupted and they got confused. Or maybe some other reason, but that's it. Now then, there is this idea of a firewall. And the firewall, okay, let me just do this. Firewall is basically the entrance to your device. And there are anything from paranoid firewalls to promiscuous firewalls. It's the 4 Ps of firewalls. And some firewalls are defined that anything goes in, anything goes out. Some of them are highly protective. And we don't want to go into technology, but you actually have a firewall in your computer and in your local router, and you can define the levels of protection you get.